with your audio or your video connection, you can email Conti or Lynn during the meeting. Before we proceed with the roll call and public comments, for the benefit of those watching on our YouTube channel, I just want to share how I'm going to facilitate today's meeting. We'll start with the roll call and confirm that we have a quorum. We'll then have staff summarize comments that have been received from the public in advance of the meeting. When we get into the agenda items, I'll first have the presenters complete their briefing. Then if it's an action item, I'll make a motion to adopt the resolution, then invite a second to that motion. After that, I'll invite questions, comments, or discussion on the motion from members by jurisdiction. And then we'll call for a vote also by jurisdiction. For the vote, I'll just ask for any nays or abstentions. So your silence is a yes vote. If the item is information only, then after the presentation, we'll provide opportunity for questions or comments also by jurisdiction. When I do call your jurisdiction, since I won't be able to see all of you, even if you have your camera on, please use the raised hand icon in your WebEx tool, and staff will assist me in calling on you. And when you speak, please clearly state your name and jurisdictions. With that, Lynn, can you please call the roll?
Great, thank you. So I'm going to state the name of your agency or jurisdiction. If you could tell us your name, we'd appreciate it. And also for those stragglers, the beauty of WebEx is it's recorded anyway. So this is almost more for everybody just to see who's with us. District of Columbia, DC Council, Charles Allen. DC Council, Christina Henderson.
Here.
Thank you. DC Council, Matt Fruman.
Here.
DC Department of Transportation.
Out here.
I believe Amanda was coming, but I didn't hear her. Anyway, DC Office of Planning.
Rebecca Schwartzman, present.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. Moving on to Maryland, City of Bowie.
Maddie Bizzurdo, present.
Thanks, Maddie. Charles County.
Jason Groth here.
Thank you. College Park.
Denise Mitchell, present.
Thanks. Frederick County.
Mark Mishler, present.
Thanks, Mark. City of Frederick.
Water, present.
Oh, Jessica, good. Thank you. Got you both. City of Frederick.
Kelly Russell, present.
Thank you. City of Gaithersburg.
Neil Harris is in the house.
Thank you. City of Greenbelt.
Kristen Weaver is present.
Thank you. City of Laurel. Montgomery County.
Marilyn Balcom online.
Thank you.
Corey Pitts, present.
Great. Thank you. Moving to Prince George's County.
Vic Weisberg, present.
Great. Thanks, Vic. Anyone else from Prince George's County? City of Rockville. Tacoma Park.
Amy Weselick here.
Thank you. Maryland Department of Transportation.
Drew Morrison, present.
Thank you. Maryland House of Delegates. Maryland Senate. I know they're busy right now. Okay, that concludes Maryland. Moving on to Virginia, City of Alexandria.
Kannick, present.
Thanks, Kannick. Arlington County. City of Fairfax.
Lynn, I just spoke with Mr. Peterson. He is working to join the call. He'll
Okay,
be
great.
with us shortly.
Great, thank you. Fairfax County.
James Walkinshaw.
And Walter Alcorn.
Got you both. Thanks. Falls Church.
Dave Snyder. Morning, everyone.
Thanks, Dave. Loudoun County. City of Manassas.
Sonia Vasquez Luna, presente.
And Thank you.
That's in here.
And I saw Ashley. Yep, great. City of Manassas Park.
Alana Mensing here.
Thanks, Alana.
Steve
William...
Hall is also
got
here.
You.
Thank
got
you.
you. Thanks, Steve. Prince William County.
Deshandra Jefferson is here.
Thank you.
Victor Angry is here.
Great, thank you. Virginia Department of Transportation.
Maria Sina is here.
Thanks, Maria. Virginia House of Delegates. Virginia Senate. Okay, that concludes Virginia. Moving on to WMATA.
Mark Phillips is here.
Thanks, Mark. And ex officio members, Federal Highway Administration.
Richard
Federal
Duran, present.
Oh, great, thanks. Richard Duran, welcome. Federal Transit Administration.
Hey, David Schilling, FTA.
Thanks, David. National Capital Planning Commission. Michael. And Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. That concludes roll call, but again, we'll keep an eye out in the participant list to capture attendance. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Next, we'll move on to public comments. A copy of the comments received online has been made available to us. Lynn, can you summarize the comments for us?
Yep, no problem. As soon as we mute folks. Great, thanks. Thank you, Chair Walkinshaw. So between noon Tuesday, January 21st, and noon Tuesday, yesterday, February 18th, the TPB received 5 emails and 1 online comment through the TPB comment form. A summary as well as each comment can be found on our meeting page. I'll briefly summarize the comments now. Dr. Clara E. Irizabel Zurita urges the TPB to take action against climate pollution from transportation, noting that the TPB has offered a set of actions for emissions reduction, including alternatives to highway expansion. Mr. Michael Replogle urges the TPB to align transportation and land use plans to support rapid mitigation of greenhouse gas pollution. Mr. Andrew Olison praises the report entitled Implementation Considerations for On-Road Transportation Greenhouse Gas Emission Reduction Strategies, encouraging the TPB to implement strategies such as encouraging development along transit corridors. Ms. Madeline Amalfi urges the TPB to implement greenhouse gas reduction strategies from transportation as soon as possible. Mr. Bill Pugh states that the Coalition for Smarter Growth is glad to see that the draft UPWP has activity to implement greenhouse gas reduction strategies, noting it is now more critical in light of the federal government's actions. He urges the board to ensure activity rises to the challenge since there are only 5 years remaining to meet the 2030 commitments. Lastly, Mr. Paul Brown offers several comments on the summary of findings from the implementation considerations for on-road transportation greenhouse gas emission reduction strategies report, stating that in general, the findings appear well-reasoned and the political calculus is explained reasonably. He writes in favor of measures that would increase the cost of vehicle miles traveled and urges consideration be given to tolling. Mr. Brown also attached a report from the Central Florida Expressway Authority. That's also attached in the materials. As I mentioned, all the comments are found on our meeting page, and that concludes my report, Chair Walkinshaw.
Thank you, Lynn. Are there any questions from TPB members for staff on the public comment? You can just raise your hand using the icon. Okay, I don't see any. We'll move on to approval of the January 22nd, 2025 meeting minutes. We've all been provided a written summary of the minutes, and I trust that we've all reviewed them. With that, I'll move that we adopt the minutes of the January 22nd, 2025 meeting as provided. Is there a second?
Second, DeShandra Jefferson, Prince William County.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any corrections or additions to the meeting minutes? And I'll just open it up to all jurisdictions. Go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to suggest any corrections or addition to the meeting minutes. Seeing none, we'll move to the vote. Are there any nays or abstentions? I'll start with the District of Columbia. Any nays or abstentions from the District of Columbia? Any nays or abstentions from Maryland? Any nays or abstentions from Virginia? Any nays or abstentions from other agencies? The motion carries. The minutes are adopted. We'll move on now to the technical committee report. We have a written summary of the February 7th, 2025 meeting. And we'll ask Vic Weisberg, chair of our technical committee, if he can summarize the meeting's outcome for us. Vic?
Thank you, Chair Walkinshaw.
The technical committee met on February the 7th, and in the materials, the link to the notes can be found in the packet that was supplied. A brief summary of the meeting. Item 7 was a overview of the transit asset management targets that we will be voting on today. Then a briefing on the draft FY 2026 United Planning Work Program that will also be presented today. And item 9, a briefing on the draft. I'm sorry, I lost my notes. On the Commuter Connections work program. And we'll be hearing more about that today, as well as item 10, commuter incentives, motivating travel behavior. What can we actually do to affect some change? And then item 11, there was an update on the TPB intercity travel study. With that, I conclude my remarks, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Vic. Are there any questions for Vic? I'll just invite any TPB members to raise your hand if you have a question for Vic about the technical committee report. Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Vic. We'll move on to our Community Advisory Committee report, and we do have a written summary of the February 13th, 2025 meeting of the Community Advisory Committee. Both Conti and I were fortunate enough to be able to join that meeting virtually. And I think we have with us today the new chair of the CAC, Daniel Papernick. Daniel, is there anything that you want to share with us about the meeting or the CAC's work?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Walkinshaw. Yeah, I can give you a brief summary. The CAC met in person, as you know, and virtually on February 13th, and we're pleased to welcome our new members and also hear remarks from you, Chair Walkinshaw, as well as from Director Sukkant on your priorities for the year and to answer questions from our CAC members. So thanks very much for joining us for that first meeting of our new CAC cohort. As you heard from our member introductions, we do come from a diverse set of backgrounds, and all of us share a common interest that is aligned with your perspective that ultimately, without people, what's the purpose of transportation? Your priorities focused on providing a safe, reliable, and sustainable transportation system and improving accessibility across the region are crucial, particularly at this time. You also asked us to continue to challenge the TPB to engage in more meaningful discussions, so challenge accepted. You also noted that CAC's work strengthens the TPB in making more informed decisions, and later in our meeting, we received an orientation to the TPB and the impact the CAC has had on the regional transportation planning. Members also discussed the DMV Moves initiative, and the CAC will continue to participate in that effort with representation from Vice Chair Ra Amin. Mr. Amin will report back to the CAC and bring our advice to the Community Partners Advisory Group as well as the working groups. We also spent some time discussing the work planning, noting that in addition to DMV Moves, Visualize 2050 will be a major focus. So we look forward to advising or challenging the TPB on recommendations coming out of that, as well as other items, including the Safety Summit and other plans that are getting underway this year. And lastly, we continued our Act Locally round robin tradition. I'll just say the CAC members are very active locally, including our newest members. So I invite the TPB members to read the CAC report for any more details about our discussions, and that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you for taking on this leadership role. CAC is obviously off to a very strong start in 2025 with a great agenda and some great new members. Let me open it up to see if there are any questions for Daniel about the CAC report. Just raise your hand. Okay, Daniel, thank you so much. Appreciate your service and that of your colleagues. We'll move on to the steering committee actions and report from our director. We have a written report from Conti. Conti, can you review the report for us?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. You have a copy of my written report, so I will just review the parts of it, but I'll be glad to answer questions on all parts of it. The steering committee met on February 13th and took the following actions. It reviewed and adopted a resolution to update an existing plan agreement that the TPB has with the Maryland Department of Transportation on the matter of distributing the federal planning funds between TPB and the MPO in Baltimore. The previous agreement included population from the 2010 census, and the current update changed or reflected the data from the 2020 census. No other change to the approach of distributing the federal planning funds between TPB and the Baltimore MPO was undertaken at this time. Secondly, the TPB reviewed and approved an amendment to our TIP to include funding for the Frederick and Pennsylvania Rail Trail project provided via a congressional earmark project in Maryland. Those were the two actions of the steering committee. Turning to the letters sent and received on pages 22 and 26 of my report, you will find that there are letters of support from the TPB to the City of Manassas VRE application for a federal Protect grant, and also for the District of Columbia and Prince William counties applications for federal built grants. Turning to the announcements and updates, the TPB is accepting applications for technical assistance grants under its technical transportation and land use connections program, as well as the regional roadway safety program. Applications are due to the TPB by March 7th, and the TPB approval is currently scheduled either for April or May of 2025. And you'll find details of both of these grant programs on pages 27 through 29 of my report. Briefly, an update on TPB staffing. We'll be wishing happy retirement to two of our TPB's staff, Bill Bacon and John Swanson. Each have served the region for about 25 years while with the TPB. They have had careers before joining the TPB. Bill is the quiet type, and he has done everything from supervising crews of drivers doing the travel time surveys, starting at 4 a.m. in the morning, to assisting the air passenger survey that the TPB does on behalf of the 3 airports in our region. And he also works on developing critical inputs for the region's travel demand forecasting model. Bill has always taken whatever task was assigned to him and then quietly got the job done. He is generally the first person to greet new staff and make them feel welcome. His office is located for years, so it used to be located across the coffee pantry, and has been the place for hearty debates about the merits of various sports teams and the fairness of recent calls by sports referees. It also is a place for quiet conversation, perhaps in support of a friend who just got some bad news. He's always been the first to arrive and the last to leave. Bill has always made time to help others. So that's what we remember of Bill. John, you have seen and heard him brief the board over the years. In my opinion, John is probably the best author to come out through the cog doors. His writing and technical professionalism have been a core part of every major production of TPB's long-range transportation plan, our magazines, newsletters, our communications, since year 2000. John also was the lead in creating and has been the lead running the TPB's Transportation and Land Use Grants Program. He also has been the lead from day one on the Transportation Alternative Set Aside Program. And he has also been instrumental in every single public outreach activity that the TPB has undertaken. He has led and managed staff, supported community advisory committee throughout his career. And he also has run 19 Community Leadership Institute sessions that the TPB has conducted over the past 14 years or so. He has a true talent for nurturing interns, all of whom have been extremely successful following their tenure here at COG. He was also the brains and leadership behind the transit access focus area work, and which has now become a grant program in itself. We thank Bill and John for their service to the region, to this board, and for their friendship. We wish Bill and John the very best in their future endeavors. So thank you, Bill and John. One last item that is not in my written report, but I feel it's a little bit timely. Chair Walkinshaw, you had discussed this with me when I met with you last month, and I suspect this is on the minds of many of our members as well. And that is, how does the currently emerging and evolving federal policy priorities affect the Transportation Planning Board, particularly the work activities and the budget, given that you will be presented with the draft budget for the TPB and our planned work later on today by him. So as members are aware, the TPB is a metropolitan planning organization that was established by federal law and funded by the federal government through the Transportation Funding Bill. The TPB gets 80% of its funding from federal government, and the 3 state DOTs contribute 10%, and the 23 other local governments contribute the remaining 10%. The work that the TPB must do is also outlined in federal regulations, both in federal highway and FTA regulations. The current federal transportation bill that has been authorized by for appropriations by the Congress, and that happened in November of 2021, and it is called the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, IIJA, and it covers a 5-year period from federal fiscal year 2022 through federal fiscal year 2026, which means September of 2025. The IIJA contains funding for a variety of programs and is administered by different federal departments. The transportation funding is administered by the US DOT and its modal administrations, Federal Highway and FTA. The IIJA outlines the various programs for which federal formally provided funds can be used, and it also establishes the funding amounts for this program. Most of the money is distributed to the states and territories, including the District of Columbia, as per a federal formula, and therefore they are also referred to as formula programs. There is also some amount of money that the US DOT provides as a grant at its discretion and based on its selection. Most of the formula grants have been around for a long time, some of them going back to 35 plus years. Metropolitan planning is one of the formula programs that has been around since 1960s. And it is the Metropolitan Planning Program that provides funding for the TPB. The IIJA in 2021 did a few things. Here are a couple worth noting. One, it increased the amount of funding for many of the previously existing programs, including the Metropolitan Planning Program, the Enhanced Mobility for Senior Adults and People with Disabilities, and a bunch of other programs. It increased the funding that we were getting in the past. It also created new formula programs, such as the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, NEVI, the Carbon Reduction Program, and it also created some new discretionary grant programs, such as the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure grants, one for communities and one for the corridors, and a new discretionary grant program promoting resilient operations for transformative, efficient, and cost-saving transportation, or the PROTECT grant. So all of these things. So Existing funding was increased to existing programs, new programs were created, new discretionary grant programs were created. So funding for all of this generally has come from the Highway Trust Fund, which is mainly based on motor fuel taxes. While this continues to be the case, back in 2001, the Highway Trust Fund revenue stopped growing faster than the spending on the surface transportation. So since 2008, federal transportation programs have been funded through all of the money in Highway Trust Fund, plus some additional money coming from the federal government's general fund. And these are called general fund transfers. And while the Highway Trust Fund money can only be used for surface transportation, and therefore there is a degree of certainty about that money, any program that is dependent on general fund transfers is a little less certain because that has to go through the Congress's Appropriations Act. So with that in mind, staff have looked at the risks for the TPB's work activities and the funding amounts, both under the current uncertainties with the evolving policy priorities. There are some risks, and I will very briefly describe that. The immediate term, meaning between now and the end of June 30th, 2025, that is the current fiscal year we are in, there are no risks for the TPB funding or for the TPB activities. Funding for this for the remaining fiscal year is used by the TPB, and it includes commuter connections, enhanced mobility for senior adults grants. And I say no risk because these funds have already been appropriated by the Congress and they have been obligated. We have been drawing money, we have spent. So that's why I feel that there is no risk. And it also means there's no impact to staff, your staff, or the ongoing work activities that they'll be conducting. So then the question is, what about the next fiscal year? And that is the budget that Lynn will be presenting to you later on today. The risk here is mixed. I say that in the sense that staff sees no risk in the funding for TPB's basic activities and all of its staff. The reason being that the federal funds are already appropriated, or they will generally be coming from the Highway Trust Fund, and that by law has to be used for transportation. And the Metropolitan Planning Program itself is in the law. Any changes to the program itself or the funding will likely have to go through the Congress. So that is why I feel that there is not much risk for the next. There is, however, some risk, maybe a low risk, that some of the programs that are dependent on the increased funding coming from general fund transfers, that additional money could be scaled back. Primarily because it's coming out of general funds or for some other reason. As of today, the work program that we will be presenting to you in a draft, has been developed in such a manner that none of the core activities of the TPB will be disrupted in the event there is any reduced funding. It has also been developed such that none of the staff required to do all of those core activities will have to be let go. What could happen in the event that there is some funding that is reduced is some of the additional work activities that the TPB had advised and staff was planning to do, activities that are not explicitly called out by the federal government, but activities that would enhance the quality of product that the TPB produces. For example, we have planned a bunch of activities to do some studies, best practices around emission reductions or around resilience and that sort of thing. So in the event that there is some reduced funding, those activities will have to be scaled back for the time being. And I say that as scaled back because the TPB does not get any money from the state DOTs or local governments to do any of this work. The only money and some of the other MPOs do get additional money, but we don't. We only get the federal money. So we have to manage our work activities within that. So there's that. But it is unknown at this time. The only thing I would add is the work that the TPB does and the process it has to follow, they're all published in federal registers. So while there is a lot of discussions and news reports and statements, we typically rely on written directive coming to us from USDOT, Federal Highway, FTA. And as of now, there isn't anything. If we do receive anything that affects either the funding amounts or the work activity, we'll be briefing the board. The last thing I will note is it is very clear through the actions taken by the new federal administration and some broad brush, high level policy statements that have been provided that activities, federally funded activities would not be used to support some of the diversity, equity, and inclusivity initiatives, DEI initiatives, or what has been termed as new Green Deal activities, that is climate change related activities. While we wait for specific directives for the MPOs, particularly for the TPB to figure out, because we'll be using federal funds, if they find any of our work activities related to either of these two initiatives, that is what we will have to wait and hear. From my own and staff's perspective, the work that the TPB has done over the past many years, particularly on the equity emphasis areas, that was not a DEI initiative. TPB finished that work even before DEI became a policy priority. That is related to both the Title VI and the environmental justice analysis that the MPOs are required to do. So it's one of those things that we see it's not a DEI initiative. So we propose to continue our work activity in that in the next fiscal year. The other work activity is TPB's recent work on reducing emissions from automobiles. The TPB, as you are aware, is not in attainment for federal standards for ozone. So we have been very proactive in studying strategies, implementing strategies that will reduce ozone causing emissions by reducing the amount of fossil fuel that is burned. And we do that by promoting carpool, vanpool, transit ridership, pricing travel through hot lanes, that sort of thing. Those strategies also have co-benefits. They also reduce greenhouse gases. So staff does not necessarily see that as a new Green Deal promoting activity. But those are the two areas where staff will be working closely with our federal representatives to better understand what, if any, directive the TPB might expect from them. And this last point I made is important because while the TPB adopts its budget next month, the budget at the end has to be approved by the USDOT. So there is a 90-day review period during which, after the TPB adopts it, we send it to the USDOT, Federal Highway, FTA review it, and they could come back with some questions if there are any. So that's the only caveat for today. Otherwise, we feel based on the official information we have today, we have done our very best to propose a project that can propose a work program that will be able to deliver and continue the work of the TPB. I'm sorry that took a little longer, but I felt it would be useful to give that primer up front. Thank you, and turn it back to you, Chair Walkinshaw.
Thank you, Kanti. Let me open it up for any questions about Kanti's report. I'll just invite all TPB members, if you have any questions for Kanti, go ahead and raise your hand. I don't see any. We'll move on to our next agenda items, which is chairman's remarks, and I'll be brief. Just want to build a little bit on Kanti's report. As he noted, TPB as an entity is very directly linked to federal laws and regulations and is largely dependent on federal funds. So it will be very important for us to continue to monitor and understand any changes or proposed changes to our mandate, funding, or framework that we followed to conduct our work activities. As Kanti noted, he and I have been discussing this over the course of the last month, and I know that he and staff are working closely with leaders of other MPOs across the country to monitor and understand any changes that are being discussed. It'll be really important for each of us in our respective roles through national organizations we might be involved in, like the National Association of Counties or the National League of Cities, to use those venues to really clearly articulate the valuable work done here at TPB and other MPOs across the country. And as we're engaging with our congressional representatives and with the administration to speak to the importance of the programs that we operate here at TPB, that's going to be something that each of us can do over the course of the next year, especially. And as Kanti pointed out, it's important for us to reiterate that all of our work here is grounded in federal law and federal regulations, and changes to our mission or our work would have to come from congressional action and the publication of new federal regulations. And until and unless that happens, we have to continue our work as the law requires. And Kanti touched on this, but this board over the course of decades really has worked very closely to develop a bipartisan, a nonpartisan regional consensus around a set of policy priorities centered around livability, accessibility, sustainability, and prosperity. And to the extent that our work in transportation planning contributes to that goal, to those goals, then we have an opportunity and a duty to continue that work. And if there's any loss of federal funds for MPOs or delay in federal funding for MPOs, work to find ways to backfill those so our work can continue. And I know that we will be up to the task to do that together. So with that, we'll move on to our action items. The first, Lynn.
Hold on. So there was a question, and
Okay.
then Mr. Peterson put it in the chat. So I think if you'd like me to read it, I can.
Go ahead,
Or Mr.
yeah.
Peterson, if you want to go ahead, Mr. Peterson.
do you want to just ask your question?
Well, sure. Just Conti, if you could just restate the federal funding and policy risk to climate change related activities for TPB, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, there are a couple ways this would that this needs to be played out, meaning we need to get more definitive directions. There has been statements by various officials to date that, for example, the NEVI program is being re-examined. The NEVI program particularly is a formula program that the state DOTs get to begin to install electric vehicle charger infrastructure around the nation. So that is being revisited. The Clean Fuel Initiative, the CFI grant program is another one. Carbon reduction program, that's a grant. And part of that grant is earmarked to be spent on projects within the TPB's planning area. Virginia has already allocated in advance some of that money. Maryland allocated their first round. DC is working on allocating their funds. That is now being re-examined. And so there are a bunch of these formula programs that gives money to the state DOTs that then get spent in our TPB areas. And there are some discretionary grants that the TPB member jurisdictions often apply. Both of those are being re-examined. That is one risk. The second and the more direct risk for TPB is TPB has been using the planning funds it gets to conduct studies that can help inform our TPB member jurisdictions, implement some of the funding they might get through either CFI, through Navy, through carbon reduction program. For example, just last year, TPB, using its planning funds, developed what we are calling the Regional Electric Vehicle Implementation Strategy, the REVI strategy. That study identified all of the areas in our region that might be opportune locations to install electric vehicle charging equipment. How many of these locations are there in the region? Where are they located? Which location might be best for level A, level 2, level 3 charges? So it did all of that. If work of such nature is seen as part of either supporting CRP or Navy or CFI or in general being climate change oriented, then there might be issues with TPB being able to use its federal planning funds to do such activities. Again, like I said, it's very important to note that we will have to wait for written directives to come. As of now, there isn't any. The other thing, that's why I noted, is there are strategies that we would implement to help reduce ozone causing emissions that also end up reducing particulate matter, that also end up reducing carbon dioxide, greenhouse gas. So there are core benefits to some of the work that we do. So we will just have to be mindful and contextualize the work that we'll be planning to do.
Okay, Tom, hopefully that answered your question. If there are no other questions for Conti, we will move on to our one action item of the day, which is performance-based planning and programming and approval of our 2025 transit asset management targets. Last month, staff shared with us the draft transit asset management targets for the various transit systems in our region. And today we have Pierre Gennard, who will present the final targets that we will be asked to approve. So let me turn it over to Pierre.
Thank you, Chair Walkinshaw, and good afternoon, board members. This is going to be the final set of transit asset management targets you'll need to see for the rest of the year. So yay. We'll get started. We have 5 minutes, so I'm trying to get through this quickly. We're going to be just reviewing those final set of targets in a moment. Just to kind of update you on where we've been since the last TPB meeting, we presented a draft set of targets to the Regional Public Transportation Subcommittee last month on January 28th. And then, as Chair Weisberg mentioned earlier, we then presented to the Technical Committee on February 7th and have since updated those draft targets one more time. However, neither of those groups, RPTS or Tech, provided any additional feedback to what was presented. So we've just moved forward. So here are the final set of transit asset management targets. One important note, the onset here. So the slides, resolution, and memo that was previously shared with the board before this meeting has been updated as of this morning with new information that we received and new transit asset management data that we received. And so the numbers that you see in this presentation, as well as in the final resolution, are slightly different. Honestly, nothing very significant, but it is the most complete and accurate count that we have of all the regional assets, as well as the targets, corresponding targets. So we received updated MTA data which resulted in new asset totals and corresponding targets for commuter bus and commuter rail assets specifically. So that's where the changes are coming from, and as well as more significant changes to facilities totals, again, corresponding with commuter rail and commuter bus services. In the memo that you received, there was a paragraph about a methodology that we were using before we received the updated data from MTA. All that is essentially moot at this point, so you can disregard that. But as you can see here, these are the final set of regional assets for the different asset classes and transit modes in the region. Same here for the service vehicles and for the track segments, signals, and systems. One note with the track segments, this is one area where for commuter rail, again, we used the best information that we had available. So we have 3.2 miles there listed for commuter rail. That is the Frederick line for Mark. But if there are any other segments that Mark or VRE have shared capital responsibility over, we don't have the information available at this time to include it here. And then with facilities, this is where you're going to see the greatest difference between these targets and the previous draft targets, whether from RPTS, TPB, Tech, what have you. And for MTA, a lot of those facilities tend to be the park and ride for commuter bus, surface parking lots for Mark, as well as commuter rail stations. There are also a couple of administrative facilities, as well as multiple maintenance facility structures that are now included. And so with that, staff recommends board approval of these updated transit asset management targets for FY25. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer any. And once these are adopted, they'll be included in the Visualize 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan and FY26 to 29 TIP. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pierre. We'll have an opportunity for comments or questions during discussion of the motion, but let me start by moving that we adopt Resolution R8 2025, approving the transit asset management targets recommended by staff. Is there a second to the motion?
Kelly Russell.
Christina Anderson, DC.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion, comments, or questions on the motion and the transit asset management targets? Let me just go ahead and open it up to any jurisdiction or agency. If you can raise your hand for a question. We had a good discussion of this last month. Okay, no questions. Lynn, I don't see any. All right, we'll go ahead and move to the vote. We'll first ask for any nays or abstentions from the District of Columbia. Any nays or abstentions from Maryland? Any nays or abstentions from Virginia? Any nays or abstentions from other agencies? With that, the motion carries unanimously. We'll move on now to our information items. First is a briefing on our draft FY 2026 Unified Planning Work Program. Next month, we'll be asked to adopt the budget and work program for this board for the upcoming fiscal year 2026, which begins on July 1st. And Lynn will preview the planned work activities for us. Lynn, go ahead.
Great, thank you, Chair Walkinshaw. So I hope you all learned a little something new from the January TPB UPWP presentation. Remember, in particular, the TPB does three main things. TPB has a ton of federal requirements to meet. The TPB serves as a forum for regional coordination, and the TPB provides data to decision makers. I provided some snippets on the process itself, how to best navigate it, and I described the annual activities that staff conducts. This month, we are asking you to take a look at the actual document, and I'm going to walk through how to read the heart of our budget and also describe some new activities and projects that staff will be engaged in starting in July. The board will be asked to approve our UPWP next month. As Conti talked about, we are very aware of the federal atmosphere. We have talked both with our federal partners and our state partners. We are proceeding here with business as usual, but can be ready to pivot if need be. So let me be clear here. The feds, our US DOT, approves this document. So you may notice a return to basics for us as well. While we can synchronize board interests with the federal regulations, we are obligated to stick to the regs, and rest assured, we will continue to do so. So the UPWP is the document that demonstrates how we carry out the MPO activities. It serves as the TPB staff work scope for the upcoming fiscal year. So I'm talking about the federal funding that is specifically allocated to the Metropolitan Transportation Planning process, which is called FHWA PL and Federal Transit Administration Section 5303 funding. So keep in mind that MPOs do not compete for federal funding. We are allocated a specific amount through the federal authorization bills through a formula by law, so we know what is available to us. We have 2 more years before the next reauthorization. We don't invoice the federal government directly. Our 3 state DOTs are our direct recipients, and this means they have a special role in our process. Besides having to pay more than the other TPB members, the rest of you pay your 10% match through your local COG dues. The state DOTs are a partner and technically are federally responsible to oversee our federal process. So now on to the budget. I would argue that the 3 most important pages of our UPWP document are tables 1, 2, and 3. So I'm expecting all of you to log in and be on the meeting material page, open the UPWP, table pages 35, 36, and 37. So that's actually the number, not the PDF number. But those are the really, that's where the focus of the presentation is for now. And so these are our revenue and expenditure summary tables. So we're still finalizing the revenues. We even got an email from VDOT last night, which I haven't double checked with this yet, but anyway, we're a work in progress. So we are pretty close. So I'm going to start with table 1. So keep in mind that the PL and the 5303 funding comes only to us. We can spend it in whatever year we want to spend it in. It doesn't go away. So our revenue totals are combined from 3 pots or buckets, if you will. It's a combination of new money and old money. So you can see this described in the left column in the document. So first we have our new federal money, which we've identified as new fiscal year 2026 funding. Second, we have old money that was allocated to us but didn't spend. This we call prior unexpended, and it's actually what we didn't spend in the 2024 UPWP. And the third pot is money that we don't plan to spend by the end of this current fiscal year in June, and we call that carryover funding. Carryover is essentially choice funding. We can choose to roll it over immediately to the next fiscal year, like if we have something cool to do that we want to do right now or we didn't finish up, or we can wait 2 years to spend it, just like that fiscal 2024 that I just talked about. So also, I will discuss this later, but you should take a look at the carryover memo, which is also on the meeting material page for the exact details of the activities we plan to carry over. And when you add all of that up, we have almost $27 million to work with in fiscal 2026. So we'll continue to work with the states to hammer out the revenue details. And while we're still waiting for confirmation on some of the buckets, we think that any of the changes will be minimal. So if you're following along in the document, tables 2 and 3 on pages 36 and 37 contain what each TPB work activity will cost to complete. So these 10 core activities support the region as a whole and are structured to follow our federal requirements, starting with the biggest one, task 1, the long-range plan. In table 2, we identify each major work activity or category and how much we expect to spend to complete the tasks identified with those activities, all of which you already are detailed in the text in the draft document, and all of which you've already seen back in January when we shared our 19-page memo. So Table 3 on page 37 is a more detailed accounting explanation of Table 2. It breaks down the budget into those categories that our funding agencies need to track and report our spending. So slide 5 here is a breakdown of Table 3, so we kind of rounded it up so you can just see the magnitude of things. So this is how much we plan to spend on staffing, direct and indirect costs, overhead, studies, etc. All right, now moving on to probably the more fun stuff, the actual work. So we do try really hard to synchronize board interests with our federal requirements. In January, I provided details on our annual recurring activities, the stuff you see all the time. Now I'm going to highlight some specific tasks that we plan to do in this upcoming fiscal year starting July 1st. I do want to remind you all of the importance of our subject matter expert advisory committees and subcommittees, since all of the activities that I'll go through now come to you after they go through the subcommittees and the committees, which is where we get great feedback on and develop a consensus for all of our work. So last month, we thought it would be a good idea to use this teaser to get you to look at our detailed memo. So you also may recall from Chair Walkinshaw's remarks last month, our priorities are to approve both the Visualize 2050 plan and the fiscal 26 to 29 TIP, to continue to pursue working on the safety activities identified from the October summit, and emissions reductions activities. So in fiscal 26, it's time to begin work on new updates to the regional bicycle and pedestrian and freight plans. These mode-specific plans are typically updated in the intervals in between our 4-year long-range plans in order to ultimately inform the subsequent long-range plan. These modal plans will provide overviews of the extent of the system, demand and use, the most significant issues and recommendations on how to improve the performance of our modal system, whether bike ped connections or freight delivery. Our Transportation Resilience Program will continue into its 3rd year with a new study focused on the impacts of extreme heat on transit riders, with a specific focus on access to critical infrastructure. We plan to continue our emissions reduction activities, which include both criteria and non-criteria pollutants. Regarding non-criteria pollutants, we have conducted many past studies. You'll recognize some of these. Our members of the public talked about them earlier today, such as the TPB Climate Change Mitigation Study of 2021, the study of implementation considerations for on-road transportation greenhouse gas reduction strategies. Under the guidance of the TPB, we are now shifting our focus from planning to implementation, such as transitioning the vehicle fleet to zero emissions vehicles, including electric vehicles. For example, the Regional Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Implementation Strategy Study, the REVI study, so that's much easier, you probably remember that, the REVI study, we just finished in 2024. It provided information that state and local governments can use when deciding where to place new public use vehicle charging infrastructure. The development of our Gen 3 travel model is now in its 3rd and final phase of development, which is usability testing, to make sure that it's ready for production use. It is anticipated that a beta version of the model will be released to the public for testing in the fall of 2025, and it is anticipated that we will be able to demonstrate that the Gen 3 travel model is ready for production use following in the spring 2026. We will also commence data collection for TPB's single largest survey effort, the Regional Travel Survey, which will collect important data about regional households and their travel behavior in the post-pandemic era. As you may remember, a few months back, the TPB held its Regional Roadway Safety Summit to discuss potential actions the board would undertake to address roadway safety in the region. Several recommendations came out of the discussion, and we anticipate working on all of them over the next few work programs. Specifically, in fiscal 2026, we plan to pursue several actions, 3 of which will likely require consultant assistance. One activity was proposed during the summit was to assess the implementation status of the strategies in TPB's safety resolution, which we adopted in 2020, which includes a list of recommended countermeasures and strategies for jurisdictions to apply. The next 2 actions are somewhat related. During the summit, it was suggested the TPB gather information about automated traffic enforcement and its impact on safety outcomes. We expect to begin research into this very soon, with work concluding in the next fiscal year. And it was also proposed that the TPB explore development of a multi-jurisdictional arrangement to fully enforce traffic laws and hold dangerous drivers to account, including reciprocity of automated enforcement. COG has begun coordination with legislative stakeholders, and TPB staff will continue assisting COG's efforts by developing a policy white paper that would provide additional data and policy research to inform discussions. For this specific action, we are currently pursuing a grant to support that effort. If time and resources allow, we also plan to work with COG to develop a regional advocacy strategy related to safety legislation and federal rulemaking. Except for in the state of California, global emissions modeling in the US is conducted using the EPA's Motor Vehicle Emission Simulator, better known as the MOVES model. The latest version of the MOVES model is called MOVES 5, and it was recently released by the EPA on December 11, 2024, and we will be using that for our new state implementation planning activities associated with attaining the 2015 National Ambient Air Quality Standards for ozone. That's what we're in non-attainment for. That's the federal regulation that will be closely working on lots of activities to help clean the air with. TPB staff will continue to support COG's Department of Environmental Planning regarding regional emissions reduction planning and electric vehicle planning activities, especially those focused on implementation. Various recent studies mentioned earlier have identified a host of strategies for reducing mobile emissions. But now the focus is on transitioning from planning to implementation. Consequently, TPB staff plan to conduct a study or workshop with possible consultant assistance to provide more information on implementation of emissions reduction strategies. Staff also plan to develop transportation sector mobile emissions inventories and track trends and progress towards meeting our goals. Next year, we will undertake notable activities that warrant special mention in this presentation. We will begin data collection for the next Regional Travel Survey, or RTS, where we will be implementing a new format to collect the data more frequently and not have to wait another 10 years to obtain important information on observed travel characteristics. We will also continue our efforts to coordinate with regional transit agencies to collect information on regional transit travel through onboard data collection. Staff will also implement important enhancements to its travel monitoring program activities, including consolidating various travel monitoring data collection activities into a single cohesive travel monitoring program. This will include incorporating congestion management process research activities, leveraging big data to provide information on regional travel trends, including monitoring data for roadways, public transportation, and active transportation, and making these data more readily accessible to outside users. In the area of travel forecasting, TPB staff plan to update TPB's strategic plan for travel demand forecasting methodologies. We will continue our federally required work on performance-based planning and programming activities. We will pursue another update of the National Capital Trail Network. This network is updated on 2-year cycles, and the last update was completed in 2024. With this update, we will assess the region's progress on implementing the network, as well as incorporate changes proposed in local plans since 2024. Through TPB's efforts to coordinate regional land use and transportation planning, staff will continue to work with COG's Department of Community Planning and Services to prepare any technical updates to the cooperative forecasts if needed. We will also continue to analyze the relationship between land use and transportation by analyzing regional growth forecasts in relation to updated regional activity centers, high-capacity transit areas, and other areas of special planning considerations. We will conduct another Community Leadership Institute session, which is an educational program where community leaders can learn how to get involved in transportation-related decision-making at the local, state, and regional levels. Over the course of 3 sessions, participants learn how, where, and when transportation decisions are made in the region. TPB staff will continue to conduct research on regional travel and make data and insights derived from these activities more accessible to its members to support regional decision-making. This will include analyzing travel behavior and characteristics revealed through surveys, research, and big data analysis, continuing to develop visualizations of these important insights and data and making them more readily accessible through our TPB resources and applications page, the TRAP. And actually, for those of you who are new, if you just write TRAP in the search bar, it pulls up all these amazing resources that we have available for you guys. So anyway, you'll hear more about that another time. Also, the Regional Transportation Data Clearinghouse, same thing. You can just write RTDC in the search bar and you'll find out all about it. conducting travel monitoring studies described earlier, and lastly, continuing to support other program areas throughout the organization by providing geospatial analysis, data management, and visualization support. TPB supports multimodal initiatives. The next round of enhanced mobility or 5310 projects will be awarded this coming fall 2025. So keep an eye out for our project solicitation this summer. And lastly, our next steps are to continue to refine the estimates and adjust our budget accordingly. We'll come back to you next month with a final document for approval. We'll also be finalizing which activities will not be accomplished this current fiscal year and take the steps to roll them over into the new 2026 UPWP, which I had talked about. We call it carryover funding. So we've already identified funding and activities for that. If you just take a look on the web, we have the memo that talks about those. If you have any comments on any of the documents we provided, the questions, any questions you have, and if you want to get them to me, the best time to do this would be by Friday, February 28th, so I get them into the tech mail out and tech can talk about them. But if you don't get around to it at the very last minute, you can provide comments to me or really about March 10th. So again, this should be the third time you're seeing, or second, January, February, oh yeah, 2 months. So this should be the second time you're seeing this information. So hopefully, if you have any comments or questions, just let us know as soon as possible. In March, the board will be asked to take 2 actions. First is to amend the 2025 UPWP to pull out those projects in the funding that I was just talking about and carry it over into the 2026 UPWP. The second action is to approve the entire UPWP as a whole. And then after board approval in March, I submit it to our federal partners. We wait patiently for them to approve it. I get an official approval letter from them. I usually get that beginning of June. And then work begins July 1. And with that, I'm concluding my presentation. Thank you and happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Lot of exciting stuff there. Among the things that I'm excited about, I think the automated enforcement work regionally is going to be really valuable. I know in Virginia, we've been working hard with little success, but working hard nonetheless in Richmond to expand the aperture of our automated enforcement authorities and programs, and having the context of successes that folks are having in the region with that will be really valuable. For new TPB members, the regional travel survey is really just an incredibly valuable product to provide context about the ways in which all of our constituents are using our region's roadways and transit networks. It's really valuable. And obviously, as I've said before, I think we have a great opportunity this year to make tangible progress on the recommendations that came out of our safety summit and the various strategies that we have identified to reduce emissions, reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in the region. So a lot of exciting stuff in here, but let me open it up to board members for any questions. And if you don't have your question today, as Lynn noted, reach out to her between now and the next meeting as soon as possible to touch base so she can make any needed adjustments before coming to us at our next meeting. So let me open it up to any jurisdiction or agency. Go ahead and raise your hand if you have a question for Lynn on the UPWP.
Here, Drew Morrison from MDOT has his hand.
Okay, Drew, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Chair. And I want to echo your comments in particular on all of the good work that's included here in the UPWP and that TPB does, and also as sort of the general comment, and we can certainly follow up more, but on the safety items in particular, see a number of good activities identified in task 3.3 related to transportation safety planning, and Lynn, you spoke to them. And I think our overall goal would be to make sure that the different action items that came out of the summit last year related to safety are all represented in some way and subject to available funding and staff capacity to make sure we make as much progress on these regional safety activities next fiscal year as possible. So appreciate the attention to that, the work that's already there, and encourage us to go as far as we can together. And as Chair Walkinshaw said, we're doing some things in Maryland to open our aperture in different areas as well. So happy to be a partner in the work ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. Other questions or comments? Conti, I don't see any others.
No, I don't see any either.
All right. Great. Thank you, Lynn. And we will look forward to seeing you again on this topic in March. And as a reminder, reach out to Lynn as soon as possible if you have questions or comments about this. We'll move on to our next information item, which is a briefing on the draft FY26 Commuter Connections Work Program. And board members know that TPB administers a regional program aimed at managing travel demand and reducing emissions by reducing single occupant vehicles, increasing transit ridership, ride sharing with carpools and van pools, and walking and biking to commute to work. And we have Dan Sheehan, the program's director, who will brief us on the budget and the planned work activities for FY26, which begins on July 1st. We will be asked to approve the budget and work activities at our next meeting in March. Go ahead, Dan.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that intro, Chair Walkinshaw. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm grateful for the opportunity today to brief the TPB on your Regional Transportation Demand Management, or TDM program, Commuter Connections. For the next few minutes, I'll provide you a quick overview of the program, demonstrate the program's impact on the region, highlight some notable projects slated for the upcoming fiscal year, and then outline some next steps for the TPB's approval process related to the FY26 work program. Thanks. All right, so Commuter Connections is a program, a commuter assistance program for workers traveling throughout the National Capital Region. Each year, we come to the TPB to request approval of the program's annual work items. This program, which was developed by the District, Maryland, and Virginia DOTs with guidance from TPB staff, sets the program's work priorities and deliverables for the fiscal year. The complete FY26 work program is included as a handout for the meeting and is available for download at the COG website for you to review in detail. The CCWP also has a companion strategic plan that defines Commuter Connections as a network of public and private transportation organizations that work together to achieve a common goal of encouraging people in the Washington region to use alternatives to single occupant vehicles. I'd like to stress the notion of Commuter Connections being a network of 24 local programs comprising this regional collective. In short, this program is truly a regional effort that has a unique and tailored impact for each local member jurisdiction. The Commuter Connections program is a direct result of the region's planning process. As part of this process, the TPB undergoes the federally required congestion management process, which evaluates congestion levels on the regional road network and suggests strategies and projects to help reduce these congestion levels. This process has identified TDM as an important element in reducing congestion throughout the region. The Commuter Connections TDM program accomplishes congestion reduction by reducing demand for the number of vehicle trips taken, which translates into less hours stuck in traffic for the average motorist. Ideally, in a general sense, the program helps move more people at a reasonable pass-through rate while limiting the need for expensive capacity-expanding roadway construction projects. The program also supports regional air quality goals and is part of the annual update on the region's long-range transportation plan and the Transportation Improvement Program. Results from the program may also help to contribute to performance measures and goals set by the region under federal IIJA requirements. In terms of program reach, the Commuter Connections program focuses on individuals commuting into or within the black bolded outline as shown on this map, which is the traditional 8-hour NAICS geography, which Lynn referenced in her last presentation. The commuter shed for this program is quite large, as commutes can originate as far as Delaware, West Virginia, Southern Pennsylvania, and even Central Virginia. This is represented by the county shaded in pale green on the map. The counties shaded in dark yellow are eligible work locations for the Guarantee Ride Home program and the supplemental GRH program funded by MTA for the Baltimore area and St. Mary's County. There are many benefits associated with the Commuter Connections program beyond the primary goals of congestion reduction and air quality improvements. By accomplishing these two primary goals, the program helps improve travel times and supports local efforts to attract and retain employers by offering commute solutions and commuter benefits that lead to improved quality of life. Additionally, spending less time fighting traffic during the work commute has been linked with reduced stress and greater cost savings for commuters. Staff routinely collects data via surveys and participant activity in our programs to determine their overall effectiveness. Our most recent evaluation, which crunches data collected from July 2021 through June 2023, shows that the program helps reduce 119,500 daily vehicle trips and 2,168,000 vehicle miles of travel each day, which results in eliminating 0.4 tons of nitrogen oxides and 0.3 tons of volatile organic compound emissions, VOCs. The program also provides a very competitive return on investment, with about just 20 cents for every daily vehicle trip reduced and a penny for every daily vehicle mile of travel reduced. Other notable societal benefits include the number of hours we collectively spend stuck in traffic, reduced by 2,883 hours per day, and an estimated savings of 93,000 gallons of fuel per day. All told, the Commuter Connections program is estimated to produce a total daily cost savings of $519,807 for commuters in the region. Now that we've discussed the context and the impacts of the program, the rest of the presentation will focus on proposed budgets and tasks for FY26, which begin on July 1st. The overall proposed budget for work items included in the FY26 CCWP amounts to just under $8.5 million, which is a modest decrease from the FY25 budget. A full funding table can be seen on page 10 of the CCWP, which again is posted to the webpage for this meeting. TPB staff worked with each of the 3 state departments of transportation to develop this proposed budget allocation for the 4 core program tasks, these being commuter programs operations, marketing, monitoring and evaluation, and the employer outreach. Each state's proposed funding commitment is shown on the right column. State funding levels are consistent with previously approved formulaic breakdowns based on census data, among other items. I'd like to take a moment and detour just a bit to acknowledge the impressive TPB and state DOT commitment to the Commuter Connections program over the last several years. As we are all well aware, our region is expected to undergo a sharp return to office effort in the coming months. In fact, it's already starting. We've seen twice as many commuters contact our program for assistance over the last few weeks from what we've experienced from the same time frame last year. There's a renewed interest in commuter connections that hasn't been seen since 2019, and we're fortunate to have the capacity to absorb this exploding demand on our services, largely because of the TPB's unwavering commitment to the program, even during the bleak pandemic years. During that time, in 2020 and 2021, the program shifted its focus instead to deliver a commute with confidence message to help essential workers navigate safe usage of transit and ride sharing. As seen in the chart on this slide, budgets remain relatively constant during this time, but naturally, expenses drop significantly. We then began rebuilding the program in 2022 with efforts focused on adapting commuter connections to assist the steadily growing number of hybrid commuters throughout the region. Now, thanks to the steadfast support and investment from the TPB and our state funders, Commuter Connections is well situated to meet the renewed public interest in the program. Data shown on this chart reinforces the notion that Commuter Connections has the capacity to continue its growth into 2025 and beyond. Commuter Connections has recovered 67% of its pre-pandemic capacity for generating carpool match lists to register commuters, 31% of its guaranteed ride home trips provided, and 42% of incentive redemptions. Since bottoming out during the pandemic, the number of carpool match lists generated and incentive redemptions have nearly tripled, and the number of guaranteed ride home trips provided have increased by nearly 400%. It's our hope to someday soon meet or exceed these level of services provided before the pandemic, and with the continued support of the TPB and the state DOTs, we are primed and ready to grow. We anticipate program growth will be realized by focusing on enhancing and expanding new initiatives that will be launched in the coming months. We'll be expanding our van pool program to the Baltimore region to help relieve excess roadway congestion caused by the Key Bridge collapse last year. The program will serve as an opportunity to introduce and pilot new guidelines and ways of implementing programs that could potentially be brought back here to the National Capital Region if successful. We'll also be improving our offering of commuter incentive programs in the National Capital Region to complement anticipated return to office efforts throughout the Commuter Cash app and the Go DMV commuter competition. Stay tuned for more information on both of these items as I'll be highlighting them during our next agenda item. A number of data collection efforts will also take place throughout the fiscal year, as listed in the several final bullet points on this slide. Notably, we expect to publish findings from the 2025 State of the Commute Survey, which will provide detailed insights on commute trends in the region. We're very interested to compare these results to the last two iterations of the survey, which occurred just prior to the pandemic in 2019, during the pandemic in 2022, and currently in 2025, post-pandemic. As I conclude this presentation, I'd like to outline what's transpired thus far in the development of the FY26 CCWP and what the TPB can expect in terms of next steps. The draft work program was developed in conjunction with the State TDM Work Group, which comprises of staff from all three state DOTs, VRDPT, and MTA. The work group approved the draft document in January, which is subsequently endorsed by the Commuter Connections Subcommittee. The TPB Technical Committee was briefed on February 7th, and now the TPB is invited to provide feedback or ask questions about the work program and proposed work items for FY26. Staff intends to present a final version of the CCWP for TPB approval at the March 19th meeting. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Any questions for Dan on the draft Commuter Connections work program? Again, we'll be asked to approve this at our meeting in March. So I'll open it up to any jurisdiction or agency for questions. Just go ahead and raise your hand. Okay. All right. No questions. And our next item, I think, is also Dan, right? Dan, you have another presentation for us on commuter incentives from the Commuter Connections program?
I do. Thank you.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you once again for inviting me back to take a deeper dive into commuter incentives. So as part of this presentation, I'll spend the first few minutes providing some conceptual context on commuter incentives, such as what they are and how they typically work, followed by an overview of the incentive programs operated by the TPB's Commuter Connections program. Commuter incentives largely exist to help induce travel behavior change. Generally, people tend to opt for the most convenient and economical travel mode available to them when commuting. For the vast majority of commuters in our region, driving alone is the default travel mode when commuting to or from a workplace. In fact, drive alone commutes ballooned up to 77% of the total mode share, according to our most recent State of the Commute survey conducted in 2022. Driving alone starts to become less of an attractive commute option when, among other reasons, such as viable transit and hotline infrastructure, commuter incentives exist to nudge commuters into alternative modes of travel, such as carpooling, taking transit, biking, or walking. Incentives are especially impactful if a commuter is discontent with the drive-alone commute. Severe roadway congestion, expensive parking, and vehicle maintenance costs, along with the constant stress of fighting traffic, are all factors that may motivate a drive-alone commuter to consider an alternative travel mode. These factors are certainly prevalent in the DC region. In fact, even in 2022, when the traffic and congestion levels were diminished, half of drive-alone commuters expressed dissatisfaction with their commutes in the State of the Commute survey. For those who may be open to changing their travel behavior, commute incentive programs can be the final jolt needed to try something new. Incentives can be deployed in two different phases: a beginning phase that motivates initial mode shift, and a second phase intended to sustain that shift. There are many different methods for offering incentives to commuters. One of the most prevalent methods in this region is Smart Benefits, operated by WMATA. Smart Benefits allows employers to provide a monthly transit subsidy up to $325 a month to ride any of the region's local transit offerings. A pre-tax benefit is also available, which allows employees to purchase their transit passes using pre-tax dollars. There are creative ways to encourage employee participation among these programs. One example is Fairfax County's Smart Benefits Plus 50 program, which provides employees a free $50 Smart Trip card to try transit by enrolling in their employer's monthly commuter benefits program. Other local incentive programs include van pool subsidies, which may help buy down the cost for leasing vans. Van Pool Alliance, a premier van pool program serving van pools in Northern Virginia, could provide up to $400 a month in leasing subsidies to qualifying van pools. Maryland provides employers an opportunity to claim a tax credit of up to 50% of qualified commuter benefits provided to employees. The Northern Virginia Express Lane Network permits carpools of 3 or more to travel toll-free on HOT lanes. Many others are detailed in this FHWA primer linked on the page, and they offer solutions of successful programs deployed across the country. This information may be a bit dated, but it also includes very valuable information on the topic. The TPB is no stranger to commuter incentive programs. For over 10 years, Commuter Connections has methodically grown its footprint in the space. TPP's interest in commuter incentives is largely related to its strategy to provide a robust commuting options for all residents in the region, with the intention of reducing the drive alone rate in our region. If a growing number of commuters opt to travel by transit, rideshare, bike, or walk, vehicular demand on the region's roads could diminish, which would reduce congestion and improve air quality. Let's take a closer look now at the Commuter Connections incentive programs, which are currently operated by TPP staff. The longest running program is Pool Rewards, which provides a cash incentive to commuters who start carpooling. This program incentivizes new carpools anywhere in the region, and commuters can register their new carpools by signing up on our webpage, where our staff will then review and approve their carpool. Carpools can earn up to $320 over 90 days, or up to $5 per day during their participation in the program. It's a hybrid-friendly program, meaning that there are no weekly log requirements, excuse me. So it's a great way to start to initiate some behavior change and trying a new mode of transportation that is HOV. I will note that we do have a temporary bonus along the Vita I-495 Next corridor. Since there's construction going on, we do award carpools traveling on that corridor a bonus $100 incentive. Similar to the carpool incentive, we also offer a van pool subsidy up to $200 a month for van pools who are qualified for the program. This is available to new van pools forming in the region, and the credit is typically applied to the van pool lease to buy down the cost from the van pool operator. Van pools, again, must be newly formed and require at least 7 commuters to participate, averaging about 80% occupancy when they do travel to and from work. Eligibility for the program is maintained through routine trip logging in our database, which is then turned over to NTD at the end of every year. Whereas the Pool Rewards program has been in existence for over a decade, Commuter Cash is a new incentive program that is undergoing a soft launch as we speak. The aptly named program incentivizes commuters to choose sustainable travel modes by offering cash rewards in exchange for verified trip logs. Commuter Cash is the outcome of a years-long collaborative effort between Commuter Connections and the Maryland Transportation Institute at the University of Maryland, where we led a demonstration project to pilot the rewards model in UMD's Incentrip mobile app. The incentive structure in Commuter Cash allows participants to earn and accrue points by logging commute trips in the app. Participants can watch their balances grow from bronze to silver to gold tiers, and once they earn the required number of points, they can redeem them for their preferred reward. The current offering of rewards includes cash via check, Smart Trip credits applied to a participant's Smart Trip card, Easy Pass credits for commuters who have an Easy Pass issued by Virginia, Capital Bike Share credits, and Visa gift cards. Soon, we anticipate replacing the check option with the PayPal and Venmo. Generally, the value of these rewards grows as participants bank more points. Bronze rewards are worth $10, silver rewards are worth $25, and gold rewards are worth $50. The exception is Capital Bike Share, where the gold tier reward is an annual membership. For tax purposes, the maximum value of incentives a participant can claim per year is $600. This is a cumulative amount for all Commuter Connections incentive programs. Communicash participants will quickly see that the fastest way to earn points is by logging non-SOV commute trips in the app. When exploring their travel options in the app's trip planner, participants tell the app where they wish to travel and set their desired travel times. The app provides several travel options for consideration. And in addition to routing information, participants are shown the estimated CO2 emissions savings based off the route that they take and the mode they use, and the amount of Communicash points that could be earned if they log a trip using the designated mode. Greater point values are assigned to non-SOV modes. One additional unique advantage of the trip planner is the ability to find carpool partners through the Commuter Connections ride matching database. As shown in the middle and right screenshots on the slide, Communicash will display contact information for carpool partners who have similar routes so they can get in touch to form a carpool. Trips only award points if eligibility criteria are satisfied by the app. These 3 criteria are shown in the blue box on the left screenshot and include these 3 requirements. Number 1, the phone's background location tracking must be enabled. 2, the trip must take place during peak commute times, which are 6:30 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. and 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. And 3, the trip must be home to work or a work to home commute trip. These series of screenshots excuse me, show the trip logging process for participants who routinely use the app to track their trips for points. First, participants enter their type of travel and destination. The app uses geolocation services to detect the starting point. During a trip, the app uses background location then to verify travel is occurring, and distance traveled and time elapsed is monitored as shown in the second screenshot. Once the commuter is within roughly 50 meters of its stated destination, the app recognizes the trip as completed and ceases tracking. Points are awarded, which are banked by participants and redeemed for financial rewards. It's a simple, straightforward process that we hope commuters find easy to use and impactful in their decision to choose sustainable forms of commuting. As it has for the past 50 years, Commuter Connections will continue to evolve our program offerings to encourage commuters in the DMV to shift away from drive-alone commuting. Our next innovation will be the Go DMV Commuter Competition, which will use the Communicash app to further incentivize sustainable travel choices, rewarding employer teams who rank highest on the Go DMV leaderboards at the end of the 3-month competition. Later this spring, we plan to reintroduce the Flex Time Rewards program, which will use predictive models to identify highly congested corridors and offer commuters who typically travel along those corridors a reward to avoid them during the times when congestion is higher than normal. Through Commuter Connections, the TPB is actively deploying transportation demand management strategies to reduce congestion and improve air quality by providing meaningful incentives that help motivate travel behavior change away from single occupant vehicles. As organizations across the region begin to call back employees to their offices at greater frequencies, these programs serve as a means for commuters to become a solution to the traffic challenges in our region, rather than further exacerbating our pre-existing congestion levels. And with that, Chair Walkinshaw, I'm happy to hand it back to you, and I'm available to take any questions or comments if time allows.
Okay, thank you, Dan. The app, obviously very exciting. Let me just open it up to any questions for Dan on our commuter incentives. Any jurisdiction or agencies? Just you said that the app is in a soft launch now. What is the timeline to go from soft launch to full launch, and what are the plans to kind of promote it when it's launched?
Oh, great question. Thank you. So it's available in both app stores as of today, actually. I haven't verified the Android version yet. I don't have an Android device, but I'm told by people who do that it is there. So that was the big item to get over. We do have a campaign starting next week, actually, promoting the app. And at that point, we will be considered all systems go and actively promoting Communicash to the region and to the public to participate and log their trips and also compete in that Go DMV competition.
Okay, great. So huge opportunity for all of our jurisdictions and agencies to promote this starting next week, it sounds like. All right, if there are no questions for Dan, we will move on to our final information item, which is the 2024 TPB Intercity Travel Study. Eric Randall will brief us on a study that was just completed on intercity travel by rail and bus. And we started off today's meeting talking about the ways that federal law and our partnership with the federal government guides our work. And this is a new responsibility assigned to us by the federal government. And Eric is going to give us the report. Eric?
Right. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'm here to present to you an overview of the report that's just been completed, as the chair described, on intercity bus and rail travel. Just quickly, I'd like to thank the consultants who worked to produce this report. The project manager at ICF, Nitesh Shah, is on the web conferencing software today in case there are any questions I can't answer. He was also assisted by other consulting firms, including Foursquare Integrated Transportation Planning and EBD Marketing Strategies. So thank you for their hard work today, working with, of course, our member jurisdictions, as well as reaching out to Amtrak and the private bus providers in the region that provide much of the intercity bus and rail travel. So here to provide you with this overview. So why are we talking about this? As the chair mentioned, this is a federal requirement for MPO regional planning. Came out of the surface transportation legislation last decade, MAP 21 and FAST Act, and then encoded in the May 2016 statewide metropolitan and non-metropolitan transportation planning regulations, which is what we follow for all requirements for metropolitan planning. So we have to look at actually intercity bus. Because intercity rail is quite large in our region, we combine the two this time. We are also looking at it because it helps us provide a more comprehensive picture for commuter transit as well. If somebody is coming from Baltimore, sometimes they're coming for work and they can use that new app that you just learned about, or it could be somebody coming down for what's an intercity trip. Of course, we also wanted to look broader than that, but it just provides more information. Again, a lot of our work here is collecting information so that we can summarize and present it to you, the decision makers, for future project planning and programming. Intercity travel is an important way for people to get around, especially people who can't necessarily afford a plane trip or don't have the resources or ability to drive. So looking at bus and rail as alternative modes for them in terms of affordability and access to long distance travel. Particularly does offer more travel options for rural and small urban areas that aren't necessarily connected by air travel. And of course, intercity travel is important from an economic development point of view. Tourists coming to the nation's capital, business travelers, how do they get here? What modes do they take? So purpose of the study was to collect information and find out more about it, because it's really kind of a new area for us, even though we've been working on it for close to a decade now. So our previous study in 2016 was a study of intercity bus traffic, and this was directly in reaction to the federal regulations at that time. And we went out and collected data on where the intercity bus is actually stopping and who's getting on them. It was a fairly detailed count of travel, ridership, collecting information. First time we'd ever done anything like that. The report is on our website. Dates from January 2017 was when the final report was briefed at that time to the TPB. So that was our first effort. And right about February 2020, we really should do this again, and certain events intervened. So we've stepped back for a couple of years, but then a year and a half ago, we started work with a desk audit conducted by my colleague Pierre Gounod, who briefed the TAM targets to you earlier. And we gave a briefing to the TPB in that June about what was the newest, latest information, because intercity bus particularly is provided by private providers. It's an evolving landscape. I'll talk about that more later on in the presentation. That's also what was happening in rail with Amtrak, return of ridership from the pandemic, new information. And then October of 2023, we had a work session. You can see the speakers there all lined up here in the boardroom, representatives from Amtrak, from Union Station, American Bus Association, who works with all the private providers, and then MTA and Virginia Passenger Rail Authorities for our local commuter rail operators, all about what they're doing, projects and plans, and there are all the links to those documents if you want to go back and read the documentation or indeed watch the intercity, the work session from October 2023. Again, what's happening in the region, what projects and plans are coming up, what can we do to improve intercity travel as a competitive mode. So as Lynn just described in the Unified Planning Work Program, this is one of the studies that we conduct, and this is funded in the last year's Unified Planning Work Program and carried over into the beginning of this fiscal year. So for this study, we concentrated on slightly different aspects. We wanted to expand our inventory and desk research to, again, update what was happening with the number of trips being carried out. And so we focused on a particular week, which was last April, and also touch base with all the private providers in the region, get more up-to-date information that they could provide us. And in some cases with the private providers, they're not necessarily willing to provide it because, again, they're in market competition with other providers. They don't necessarily want to reveal all their cards, as it were, but we collected what information we can. And then new for this year is we tried to use big data sources, looking at some of the services that are out there, Replica and Streetlight, as well as federally funded National Household Travel Survey. And found out that the data really wasn't that great. There's not enough collected of it at scale. Nobody's really concentrating in this area. But we did try to take what we had, and when you get to the final report, if any of you care to look at it, there is some information that we were able to glean from the big data out there. And then finally, we did an intercept survey where we went out and talked to people. Please fill out this online form. People had readers there, and we'll show some slides about that later on. But how did you get to this intercity mode? Where are you going today? What is your trip purpose? Tell us a little bit about yourself. And it just provided more data. What we did not focus on for the study was sheer number of counts, because we were still coming out of the pandemic. These modes have been recovering in use very strongly. Amtrak's setting new records in ridership. But we still felt we weren't at a place where the data we could collect was really comprehensive and accurate for sheer total number of counts. So we just superficially touched on that data item. Though again, intercity bus and rail combined, we're looking at 4 to 5 million trips into the region every year, which is not quite as much as, say, one of our airports handles in the region, but is still roughly probably about 20% of intercity travel besides what's happening on cars or automobiles, which is a lot more intercity travel. So just some highlights from the study. We talked about Amtrak ridership. Amtrak's ridership is growing pretty strongly, bouncing back. Intercity bus ridership, not quite there yet. It's been slower to grow. What's happened is that a number of bus providers went out of business or were merged or were taken over during the pandemic when suddenly their customer base disappeared. There's continual flux in the industry, but more trips are happening, more bus service is returning, so there is more interest in intercity bus. Our busiest station is, of course, Union Station. Roughly 2/3 of our trips and 2/3 of our travelers are coming in out of Union Station because, of course, it's our major Amtrak station. And then in back, there's the big bus garage with many intercity bus providers operating out of it, though it's not the only location. We did look at, again, at the people who take intercity bus and rail. We found that income and ethnicity were strongly correlated with the choice of bus or rail, what type of trip purposes, access to alternative modes, something of a Venn diagram. I think you'll see a slide on it in just a few minutes. Most people who are traveling by intercity rail are going to New York City. It's like 2/3, again, of our travel is to and from New York City. Though, of course, rail and bus does stop away along the way, Baltimore, Wilmington, Philadelphia, Newark, and then into New York City. We're continuing on. Again, Amtrak is our intercity rail provider, essentially the only one in this area and almost the only one in the States. And then FlixBus is our biggest intercity bus provider. They acquired Greyhound last year, so they've been absorbing Greyhound, again, that turnover in the private bus industry. So they're our biggest intercity bus operator right now. And then most people take intercity trips for personal or leisure time, though occasionally it is done for work or business purposes. Oh, and there's a survey being conducted in the photo right there. So this is where you can go on intercity bus and rail. Direct links, one seat ride, if you will, to over 50 cities across 21 states. Though again, most of our travel is up the Northeast corridor, Bosnia Wash, whatever you want to call it, to New York City, and then onwards to the Boston area. Intercity rail, which is Amtrak. Intercity bus, we count 13 providers in our region, but that's changing on almost a monthly basis. And then, of course, our commuter bus and rail systems, which complement those intercity services. Again, I already mentioned this, but Megabus was another big private provider of intercity bus, went into bankruptcy, continuing to operate, but what the financial long-term situation is for them is unknown to me. But what is happening across this whole country, not just in our region, but in our region, we do have Virginia Breeze, which is where the Department of Rail Public Transportation is funding a intercity bus service across this Commonwealth of Virginia. 4 routes, soon to be 5 routes if it hasn't started already, gradually forming a network of publicly funded intercity bus service for the state as a whole. Maryland does something similar as well, providing grants to intercity bus operators or trans-state bus operators, if you will, within Maryland to provide connections for everybody across the state. But if you wanted to get on a single seat ride from DC, you could travel out to Chicago, you could travel to Boston, you can travel up to St. Albans, Vermont, and then transfer to go into Canada. You can head to New Orleans, the Big Easy, or down to Miami or Tampa or Orlando. So here's a map of the stops in the region. So you can see all these dots for the different providers. You might have seen ads for them or ridden them yourself. Bolt Bus, Flixbus, Virginia Breeze, Vamoose. They stop at various stops across the region. You can see quite a handful scattered across Virginia, as well as in DC, and then on into Montgomery and Prince George's County. Again, our biggest stop or station is Union Station, roughly 2/3 of our trips. Other major station stops are the rail ones, again, New Carrollton and Alexandria, but then you get into the bus locations, New York Avenue, Vienna, DuPont Circle, Bethesda, Silver Spring, Roslyn, and then back to rail, Quantico, Amtrak. This is where you can get the most trips from. And again, this map is changing, but something to look at. So we did this intercept survey, sent the surveyors out in person to talk to people departing or arriving. The people who were departing, particularly if their trip was delayed, were a lot more willing to talk to us than people who were just arriving and were in a hurry to get someplace. But we tried to get all that information, quick 5-minute questionnaire. Respondents were then eligible to receive a gift card. So the survey took place in September and October. Together, we got a total of about just over 1,700 completes, which is a pretty good number for a survey. I think overall, it provides, collectively, it provides fairly statistically significant data. But when you get down to a specific or individual stop or location or service, it's not statistically significant. We just don't have the resources to do that. It's more indicative on what is happening, but it gives you some idea of what's happening out there with intercity bus and rail travel. So many graphs in the report, and in fact, there's about 8 extra slides appended to the slide deck if you want to page through it at your leisure after the presentation, but provides more information. I'll just touch on some of the top ones right here. Most people, just about 50%, are only taking this intercity trip. It's a one-off special occasion, but about a quarter do travel more often than that. Perhaps not as often as once a month, but quarterly or several times a year. 15% though are making a monthly trip. And then people are taking it weekly or in some cases even daily when they might be taking it for a special work assignment, for instance, and coming in by intercity travel. So say a short period of commuting travel. Again, 70% of responses, 2/3 of our travelers are coming in through Union Station. Moving on to socio-demographic data, you'll see the ethnic groups taking intercity travel. Almost 50% of travelers are Black or African American, just over 25% white, and then other ethnic groups taking intercity travel. Again, this somewhat correlates with household incomes. where together groups making up less than average household income, which is approximately 80,000, but let's say below 75,000, make up over 60%, almost 2/3 of intercity travelers. So these tend to be people who don't have access to an automobile or don't have the ability to afford a different mode of travel, such as air travel. Could be college kids, could be seniors, could be low-income people, all taking intercity travel. So intercity travel by bus and by rail is particularly important to them because it provides them access to other cities where they may have family, friends, or indeed want to make a trip. Particularly minority ethnicities and lower income groups tend to take the bus, which does tend to be more affordable, whereas higher income travels favor trains. Where are they going? Where are they coming from? Most of our people in the region, almost 2/3, are traveling in and out of DC. That's where most of the trips are offered. A lot of people in the core may not own automobiles, and it's easy to get to the train station or bus station and take it. But we do see people from Arlington and Alexandria, also within the original Diamond, as you will. And then we didn't put together data for the outer jurisdictions necessarily, but you can see the other stops in the region with some of their locations where people are traveling from. Again, this data is not statistically significant at this rate of response. It's more indicative, but we would expect that most people within the Diamond, Washington, Alexander, DC, Alexander, Arlington, intercity is available, readily available, easy to access, a more competitive choice. So besides the report, which is a goodly length and has a lot of information in it, we put this onto the internet, if you will. So the web map. Amanda's putting the link in the chat so you can take a look at it. And it's also featured there at the bottom of this slide. So you can go in and you can zoom in and choose which layers of data you want to look at. If you just want to look at stations in stops in your jurisdiction, you can select those. You can look at different travelers, time of day, time of week, different modes, and all the other information that we did collect from this effort is there on the web map. So if you're interested in it, please take a look. And finally, we did close with recommendations. Again, the federal requirement is that they want MPOs to consider intercity bus travel in project planning and selection for the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, the TIP, and transportation planning regionally. So we did talk about possible things that could be done, promote bus and rail for intercity travel options. So again, the private providers and Amtrak do that already themselves, but perhaps putting more links on transportation websites, travel information around the region. Looking at equity considerations, do people have access to the bus stops, to the rail stops? Are they able to get there easily? Are they being treated fairly in terms of and equitably in terms of access to intercity bus and rail? We'd love to collect more information on intercity bus and rail performance measures, acknowledging, of course, that the private bus providers have an interest in only sharing limited information. Station improvements, I think most folks do know about the large improvements planned for Union Station that hopefully will get funded someday, but also the other bus stops that are used in the region, places like Roslyn, places like Bethesda, whether people waiting there or for an intercity bus have information, whether they have shelter in the event of foul weather. Is there information how to get there from, say, the Metro Rail station at Roslyn down to where the intercity buses stop and vice versa? And that all promotes ensuring first and last mile connectivity, connecting that intercity bus and rail. Again, a lot of people get there by transit. Is there information both ways to connect people to the overall public transportation system? Of course, investment in rail infrastructure, again, Union Station, but as well the improvements Amtrak is making. And then doing whatever we can to promote intercity service providers and make sure that if a particular company does go out of business, that doesn't mean we lose intercity bus access totally to one area in the region. So I tried to keep that fairly short and sweet. Again, a lot of information out there. I will be happy to answer any questions or ask my project manager from ICF to assist if necessary. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Great report, great information there. Let me open it up to questions from any jurisdiction or agency. Go ahead and raise your hand if you have a question.
Mr. Snyder from City of Falls Church and Mayor Ashton from City of Rockville had their hands up.
Okay, Mr. Snyder, go ahead.
Thanks very much. Thanks for a great report. You know, I've used intercity bus from time to time, and I do believe that it is an effective and efficient alternative for many types of trips. And I'm just wondering if your recommendations really are expansive enough for really growing this mode. And then two specific questions. Has there been any studies, and maybe it's in your report, done about the intercity bus use of express lanes and whether that's improved travel times? Because one of the arguments for express lanes is bus service. And I'm interested in documenting that as part of the continuing consideration of express lanes. And then secondly, thoughts about a huge amount of time is taken with the traffic right around Union Station. Is there any thought given to growing modes that are outside of Union Station as major points for intercity bus? Of course, they'd have to be supported by ridership. So those are the two questions. And thanks again for a great briefing. I do think this is an element of our multimodal system that should get, if anything, even more attention. Thanks.
Thank you, sir, for those very good questions. I will say those are probably a step beyond what this report was focused on. The recommendations were fairly brief and focused on at a high level, but we did not make any real specific recommendations, just approaching, say, strategic opportunities that we identified, as in it is important to continue investing in these things. But we didn't go into specific projects or detailed recommendations. Regarding use of the express lanes, we did not focus on that. Again, well, much of our travel is directed northeast, where we don't have the express lanes coming out of DC. Collecting data from I-95 express lanes would perhaps be useful. Again, with sort of the changing dynamics on how many intercity bus providers were out there right now and where they were going, it was not something we spent a lot of effort on. And similarly, Union Station, again, that's getting into a very project-specific site. There's the very detailed environmental impact statement on Union Station, alternatives analysis that does have information on what they would like to do with access to Union Station. So we ourselves did not go into that, though of course that document is out there in the public sphere.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Snyder. Mayor Ashton?
Thank you. I had some similar questions, so I won't repeat, but I did want to note the education piece, I think, would be critical, so more people are aware of how these buses interrelate and how they can get around. My other question was related to, similarly on rapid transit lanes, is do we see an increase in ridership when jurisdictions put rapid transit lanes? I'm not sure you're able to answer that question. And the third is, will there be another analysis planned and sometime in the future to see how the impact on federal workforce, or that's return to office or changes in agency status in terms of how many people are employed, has an impact on your data?
Ms. Ashton, this is Kanti. I can take the last question. I think we definitely are keeping our eye on this return to office initiative. As Dan reported earlier, we have already begun to see an uptick in the number of telephone calls we are getting and the website hits we are getting for people who are interested in carpooling and vanpooling. Maybe they were doing it before, they had left it for 4 years and now they want to get back into it, or they want to start afresh. So I think it is fair to say that in the next year or so, looking at the broad impacts of return to office is something that we will we certainly will be engaged in, including intercity travel. The other point I will make in general, both to Mr. Snyder and to your question, is this survey was more from the user perspective. There seems to be some interest in understanding from the operator's perspective, what do they see, what investments have they benefited from, such as express lanes, or what are their efforts in terms of expanding or marketing, and also station improvements outside of Washington, D.C.'s Union Station. So there seems to be enough of an interest in understanding the operator's perspective. So that is also something that we can take a look at. But clearly, intercity travel is now a new requirement for MPOs, and we have been working on trying to do it in a way where it will help our members in their decision making or in their transportation investment. So we'll make a note of pursuing both of those.
Okay, we are right at 2 o'clock. So if there are no other questions, Eric, thank you for the study. As Eric noted, it is available on the TPB website for folks to review, and you can certainly reach out to Eric if you have additional questions on it. But that was the last item of our meeting. Our next meeting is scheduled for March 19th, 2025. And Conti, Lynn, if there's nothing else, we will go ahead and adjourn. Anything else, Conti?
No, the March meeting is, as of now, scheduled to be an in-person meeting.
Yep.
Okay. See you all in March.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.